Welcome to our training session, Understanding Disabilities and Accommodations. Today, we will be discussing the many ways you can get to know your students. Today, we're focusing on three key areas. Understanding your students through the IEP. We'll review key parts of the IEP document to help you better understand your students' needs and learning styles. Recognizing common disabilities. We'll explore three common disabilities in your classroom and the accommodations needed for effective learning. Getting to know your students beyond the IEP. We'll provide strategies for connecting with your students outside of the IEP, strengthening your role as their teacher.
In our first learning outcome, let's see how we can get to know our students through the IEP document. We hope that you have some familiarity with your students' IEPs because it provides a lot of information about your students. However, for a lot of us, the IEP document may be intimidating. We may not understand the purpose of each page or where to even begin reading it. In case this document is still a mystery, we will go over the key pages that will provide you valuable information about your students. We will discuss eligibility found on page 4, present levels of performance on page 3, goals on page 5, FAPE Part 1, which covers accommodations and modifications, and FAPE Part 2, which is the summary of services page. IEP information can also be found on MySys. When you log into MySys, you can input a student name and select search. Once the student's information is displayed, you may access special education information by clicking on the Service tab, as you see here. On the left, you will find special education pertinent dates, date of the initial IEP meeting, dates for the present meeting, and upcoming meetings. In the special education summary, the case manager will be listed. The case manager is usually the special education teacher or the RST. Beneath the case manager, the student's eligibility is noted. As we see here, there are RSP services and the amount of time in special education is listed at 19%. If there is a behavior support plan, it would also be listed here. Any assistive technology and extended school year, or ESY, eligibility are also listed. Notice that the column on the right-hand side indicates the program and curriculum type, which here is shown as both being general education. On this MySys screen, we can see the current special education services page. It lists the RSP math and literacy minutes in addition to speech and language and adapted PE minutes. For example, adapted PE is 30 minutes weekly and language and speech is 120 minutes monthly. As a side note, RSY stands for regular school year. The current instructional accommodations mention that instruction in the classroom should be supported by positive reinforcement, time to process what is being asked, teaching prompting, as well as additional items. All of this information and the important details and accommodations from the IEP document is located on MySys or also on the hard copy in a student's CUME folder. Eligibility of students with disabilities for special education is determined by the IEP team according to specific criteria for each of the 13 eligibility categories. You'll notice 3 eligibility categories are bolded: autism, specific learning disability, and other health impairment. They are bolded because these are very common eligibilities that we see in our special education population in our general education setting. I can either check MySys or page 4 in the IEP document called the eligibility page. This is what it looks like. Besides a student's eligibility, we can get a good understanding of how a student is performing based on the present level of performance, or PLPs, included in the IEP. A student's PLP is key in setting annual goals. There are different areas that a PLP might address. For academics only, core subjects are included, such as reading, writing, math, and ELD. Students that are English learners or emergent bilingual must have an ELD PLP. Non-academic areas that may have present levels of performance can include behavior, vocational education, and other related services as needed. PLPs are found on page 3 of the IEP document. Each PLP has 3 parts: the student's strengths, needs, and impact of disability. In the strengths section, we find what a student is able to do. The needs section includes what a student still needs to learn based on what grade level they are currently in. Finally, the last section is the impact of disability. This is a statement of how the student's disability may affect their involvement and progress in the general education curriculum. As a general education teacher, you too are responsible for contributing to the information included in the student's PLP. You will want to use academic and non-academic data. Be sure to include both strengths and needs. Collaborate with your student's case manager, usually the RST, at your school site on what information or data is needed. Remember, observations, work samples, pre and post assessments, and/or anecdotal records are all forms of data that can be included. A big part of a student's IEP is their annual goals. Goals are linked directly to a student's PLP. If a student's PLP states that their disability may affect their involvement and progress in the general education curriculum in a specific area, then that area needs a goal. IEP goals are written as SMART goals. SMART stands for specific. What will the student have to do? Measurable. How will you know if the student has met their goal? Achievable. Can the goal be achieved with the supports included in the IEP? Relevant. Is the goal on grade level and based on the student's needs? And time-based. By when will the student achieve this goal? Goals must be written on grade level and connected to the Common Core state standards. Goals are found on page 5 of the IEP document. This sample is an IEP SMART math goal. The goal shown here in red is specific. Identify the correct operation and write the equivalent expression with minimal teacher support. Measurable. Given 10 mathematical statements and measured by work samples. Relevant, on grade level. And time-based, will be obtained when the student shows 80% accuracy in 3 out of 4 trials. Another part of the IEP is called FAPE Part 1. This page can be very helpful when trying to figure out what supports your student needs in reaching their academic goals and grade level standards. FAPE stands for Free and Appropriate Public Education. On this page, the student's accommodations and modifications can be found. The accommodations and modifications listed here are not optional. They must be used with your student. For example, if it lists that students can use a calculator, then students must be allowed to use a calculator. If it lists that math questions are to be read aloud to students, then they must be read aloud to students. Same goes for extra time. If it is stated here, then you must allow this student to have extra time to complete and turn in assignments. It is very important that during your annual IEP meeting to make sure that the student's accommodations and modifications listed here are needed based on data collection, observations, and teacher input. Again, as mentioned earlier, you can also access your student's accommodation on MySIS.
In this slide, we will go over the differences between accommodations and modifications. When you have students with an IEP in your classroom, it is crucial to understand that unless their IEP specifies an alternate curriculum, they're on the core curriculum. These students are expected to engage with the same curriculum, meet the same expectations, and achieve the same standards as their peers. So, what exactly are the differences between accommodations and modifications? Accommodations aim to provide students with disabilities equal access to course, instruction, materials, and evaluation. They level the playing field by reducing or eliminating barriers caused by the interaction between a student's disability and the learning environment. These accommodations are documented in students' IEPs and can be implemented across various aspects of the learning process, including the environment, presentation of instruction, materials, assignments, organization, and student responses. On the other hand, modifications involves changes to the curriculum, expectations, and/or standards. They are typically used for students on the alternate curriculum who are unable to access the general education curriculum. It is important to note that a modification is not the same as an accommodation. Now, let's look into some examples of accommodations and modifications. Let's look at some accommodations that could be written into an IEP based on student needs. As mentioned in the previous slide, accommodations are changes made to the environment, curriculum, instruction, or assessment practices that do not fundamentally alter or lower expectations in instructional level, content, or performance criteria. Accommodations play an important role in helping students with disabilities access the curriculum on par with their general education peers. Here are some examples suitable for both elementary and secondary levels. Please note that certain examples, such as graphic organizers, can be beneficial across all grade levels. For elementary, graphic organizers, highlighters, checklists, speech-to-text tools. For secondary, digital notebooks, illustrated vocabulary or subject concepts, categorized folders. For instance, while the categorized folders can help a student with special needs, using this type of folder is beneficial to all. It is important to understand that accommodations do not make tasks easier for students. Rather, they make tasks accessible. Allowing students access to speech-to-text technology, for instance, doesn't mean someone else is doing their work. The student still has to provide input for what is to be typed. Remember, accommodations require discussion during an IEP meeting and must be added to the IEP's accommodations section for free appropriate public education, or FAPE Part 1. The term modification refers to changes made to the environment, curriculum, instruction, or assessment practices that fundamentally alter or lower expectations in instructional level, content, or performance criteria. Modifications are typically applied for students on the alternate curriculum. In cases where the IEP team determines that these students are unable to comprehend all of the content taught by the instructor, modifications may be necessary. For example, assignments for an elementary school student with cognitive impairments, which limit their comprehension of general education class content, may be both reduced in quantity and substantially modified to better suit their needs. It's important to note that most modifications are implemented by the special education teacher or inclusion facilitator. If you have any questions regarding modifications, it's recommended to reach out to the special education teacher and/or the special education administrator for assistance and clarification. Now, let's examine some common examples of curriculum modifications tailored to meet a child's needs. These may include simplified text and alternate testing methods. It's important to ensure that students only receive modifications if they are explicitly outlined in their IEP. Here are additional accommodations that can be included in IEPs. It's important to highlight that while we talk about them to support students with IEPs, many of these accommodations benefit the entire class. For example, sentence starters and written directions on the board are useful for all students. Collaborating with both general education and special education teachers to implement these accommodations can enhance support for students across the curriculum. Take a moment to review them. Think about what accommodations you have experimented with in your classroom. All right, let's check our understanding of accommodations. Here's a quick quiz. How much do you know about accommodations? Which student has preferential seating? Student 1 or student 2? The answer is both. Student 1 is sitting here because he can access the instruction by sitting up close, needs teacher proximity, and may be away from the auditory distraction of the AC unit. Students in picture number 2 benefit from this seating arrangement by being provided a more quiet location for extended time to complete their assignment, or by looking at their notes and sharing ideas with their partner, or even translation from a buddy partner. Preferential seating isn't always at the front, nor is it where the student wants. It's what's best to help them access the curriculum. Here's another question. What grade level are visual schedules an appropriate accommodation for? The answer is all grade levels. Visual schedules benefit all students from all grade levels. One more. If a student has difficulty taking notes, which of these accommodations might be appropriate? Allowing the student to copy another student's notes with permission, giving a copy of the teacher's notes to the student, providing a graphic organizer for the student to use, or all of the above. The answer is D, all of the above. All accommodations are appropriate. The idea is to make sure students get what they need. Remember that accommodations aim to provide students with disabilities equal access to course instruction, materials, and evaluation. They level the playing field by reducing or eliminating barriers caused by the interaction between a student's disability and the learning environment.
To find out what services your student will be receiving, locate the section of the IEP labeled FAPE Part 2, Summary of Services in the IEP document. The services are presented in two different ways, the summary grid and the summary of services page. The summary grid shows the service, interval, and frequency, total number of minutes, and what goals are being addressed. I can tell by looking at this grid that the student is receiving RSP in both math and language arts. They are receiving 300 minutes 5 times a week for math and 120 minutes 1 to 5 times a week for language arts. If you want something that is a little more in depth, the summary of services page can be used. This is also found on FAPE Part 2. Here you can see that the student is receiving RSP services in math 1 to 5 times a week for 60 minutes. They are not being pulled out of general education. Their services are being met by collaborative teaching and planning, and that both the RST and the general education teacher are responsible to ensure that the student is meeting their math goal. As mentioned earlier, you can find the IEP services grid located in MISIS. These colorful icons are some of the types of services that a student with an IEP may receive. There are a variety of services, including speech and language therapy, psychological services, physical and occupational therapy, and counseling services. Depending on what is written in the IEP, service providers may be coming into your room to work with the student, pull the student out, or consult with you on what to provide for the student during class time. Regardless of how the service is received, you should be collaborating with the service provider on an ongoing basis. You can find the FAPE Part 2 types of services on the IEP document and in MISIS. In this learning outcome, we will look at the 3 common eligibilities that you will likely encounter during your teaching career. Some of the students in your classroom may have eligibilities of autism spectrum disorder, ASD, specific learning disabilities, SLD, and other health impairments, OHI. Positivity is so important. Please take a moment to read some positive perceptions that teachers may have of their students. Think of the word disabilities as 2 words, different abilities. Using different abilities instead of the word disabilities when referring to our students sends the message that all students have abilities and talents. There are many ways that we as teachers can support positive perception of students. We can have high expectations for all students and support them when meeting grade level standards. We can structure lessons and classrooms in a way to be sure that all students have access to grade level curriculum. We can provide the right accommodations so that students can meet curriculum tasks and assignments. We can provide social emotional supports throughout the day. Some examples include checking in with students, creating a calming corner, or teaching breathing exercises. We can create inclusive environments in and out of the classroom so that all students can find their place on campus. Autism spectrum disorder, or ASD-AUT, is a developmental disability significantly affecting communication and social interaction. Also characterized as having restricted, repetitive, and stereotyped patterns of behavior or interests, generally before the age of 3. ASD can adversely affect a child's educational performance. As the word spectrum in ASD suggests, students can be found within a wide spectrum, from mild to moderate with high functioning skills, or moderate to severe with low functioning skills. In addition to the engagement in repetitive activities and stereotyped movements, such as stimming, also known as self-stimulating behaviors, are repetitive body movements or repetitive movements of objects, or constantly talking about their favorite topic, there is also the resistance to change. Environmental change or change in daily routines, such as an unannounced fire drill, can cause challenging behaviors such as throwing tantrums or meltdowns. Oftentimes, these students might engage in behavior that might seem unusual, such as the responses to sensory experiences, like lying on the floor because the cold on their skin is soothing.
Here are some accommodations you can use with students with autism. Let's begin with looking at visual supports. One example is visual supports that include visual boundaries, visual cues, and visual schedules. Visual boundaries help students navigate the classroom and/or their environment. For example, a picture of a computer in the computer area helps students understand the purpose of the different classroom areas. Another type of accommodation is modeling. Aside from using the traditional I do, we do, you do modeling, you can model lessons and task steps using videos and audio recordings. Other accommodation examples include, but are not limited to, task analysis and reinforcement. According to the California Code of Regulations, specific learning disability, or SLD, means a disorder in one or more of the basic psychological processes involved in understanding or in using language, spoken or written, that may have manifested itself in the imperfect ability to listen, think, speak, read, write, spell, or do mathematical calculations, including conditions such as perceptual disabilities, brain injury. On this slide, we have listed some of the basic psychological processes that may be impacted, such as attention and visual processing. These characteristics may manifest themselves in the following ways listed on this slide. They may be easily distracted during a lesson, have lots of paper clutter at their desk, struggle with remembering all the steps in multi-step directions. Let's take a look at some of the SLD most common accommodations. Provide appropriate timing. Provide extra minutes, a different time of the day, or a few more days to students that need additional time to complete a test. If a student seems frustrated by math problem number 4 out of 10, give them a break. Set a timer so that they know they can go breathe, drink water, or take a walk. But then they hear that timer go off, they know they can come back to the test. Allow for a variety of student responses. Make your classroom a universal design for learning. Give the students the same learning goal, but allow for them to show you in their own way, in different ways. Classroom management. Clear classroom organization, culture, and structure, such as knowing where materials are located, understanding the purpose of wall posters, seeing clear visible schedules, transition signals like musical cues, all help students feel safe to learn in this type of environment. The third eligibility we want to discuss is other health impairment, or OHI. It is defined by California Code of Regulations as having limited strength, vitality, or alertness due to chronic or acute health problems. Some examples of these health problems may include, but is not limited to, a heart condition, asthma, sickle cell anemia, epilepsy, leukemia, or diabetes. OHI adversely affects a child's educational performance. So what are some of the impacts of this eligibility? It can range from students missing school and requiring frequent breaks to affecting self-esteem and body image. Here is a list of possible accommodations you might find for students with OHI. With the case of assistive technology, the IEP will know if a student has been prescribed assistive technology or AT. Schools that have students requiring AT have assistive technology assessors assigned to their school. If you have any questions about assistive technology equipment, reach out to the student's case manager so that they can contact the assessor. Here are some examples of technology to access and participate in instructional activities: computer-based instruction, email communication, online class discussions and class lectures, and maybe use of a certain keyboard, which the occupational therapist, OT, or assessor may suggest. ADD and ADHD are the most common health problem under OHI that you will encounter in your classroom. The IEP can offer accommodations for students to help them manage their ADHD, including extra time on tests, instruction and assignments tailored to the child, positive reinforcement and feedback, using technology to assist with tasks, allowing breaks or time to move around, changes in the environment to limit distraction, and extra help with staying organized. Now it's time for a think and stretch activity. Please take a brief moment to think about the following questions. Who are your students with IEPs in your class? What are their eligibilities?
Now let's look at how we can get to know our students outside of the IEP. There are many different ways and platforms that you can use to gather data about the students in your classroom. MISIS gives you school-wide data, which is designed around the educational life of a student, bringing together attendance, assignments, grades, test scores, health, program eligibility, and more. Another platform is the Whole Child Integrated Data. Teachers, counselors, and administrators can use the data here for the purpose of improving school systems and student outcomes. It has a data analytic dashboard that can be used to monitor student progress, personalize instruction, and identify effective practices. We also continue to use cumulative records in LAUSD. You are very familiar with these as they are housed on your school site. Here, you can view the history of the student, pinpoint strengths, supports, and areas of need. Finally, My Data is a web-based tool that makes student data available and usable for LAUSD educators in order to improve teaching and learning. My Data reports student information such as state test scores, student grades, attendance, A through G coursework, periodic assessments, English language learner or emergent bilingual data, student attendance, and student behavior reports such as discipline referrals and suspensions. This is your source for a wide range of current and historical data on individual students and schools. As our district works towards increasing inclusive practices, more students with IEPs will be learning in general education classrooms taught by general education teachers. It is so important that you build a relationship with the special education teacher to ensure communication and collaboration to help support these students. When working with other teachers and support providers, be sure to discuss what the student can do without assistance, what accommodations can be put in place to support the student in meeting grade level standards, what data we have that shows the student is working towards their goals, and what types of social emotional skills may need to be modeled and practiced. When sitting at a student's IEP, you are part of the IEP team. Be sure to provide input based on your data that can be written in the student's present level of performance. This input should help guide the development of goals. Share your ideas on what supports and accommodations the student needs to be successful to access grade level curriculum. It is important to remember to always start by identifying the student's strengths in any conversation about students, whether it is an informal check-in or during a formal IEP meeting. Because you are responsible for implementing the IEP alongside the special education teacher, it is paramount to collaborate together to collect data, help write accurate PLPs, and create appropriate goals. Many different people work with your students besides you on a regular basis. So who shares information about your students with you on a regular basis? Some examples can include parents, guardians who may share information with us via conferences, check-ins before and after school, student surveys, emails, phone calls, or on communication apps like Class Dojo or Remind. They have a lot of useful information about their child's talents, interests, and dislikes. All of this information is valuable in setting a safe and structured learning environment for the student. School-wide personnel like cafeteria staff, the bus driver, the custodian, all have daily interactions with the students and may provide valuable information such as the student's moods, favorite food, and social skills. Classified personnel like paraprofessionals see a lot of our students' personalities and response to activities during recess, lunch, and in small groups. And don't forget, we also have the IEP service providers that work with our students on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis. Getting to know your student outside of the IEP includes many opportunities for you to observe students' talents, preferences, and interests. Capturing a student's moments of success in the classroom, their ability to make a new friend, or finishing an art project is just as important as noticing their struggles. All of these observations can be important to tailoring your lessons, objectives, and goals. Noticing how students respond to positive comments, praise, and community building activities give insight into their social, emotional well-being. We have covered a lot of information today. Take a moment and think about something you learned, why it is important to you, and what you will now do with this information. Here's what, so what, and now what. Again, what did you learn? Your here's what. Why is it important? Your so what. And how will you apply this information to your current practice? Your now what. Please pause the video to jot down your thoughts. We will leave you with this quote. Nothing ever goes away, especially when it teaches us what we need to know. You will remember your students, maybe not by name, but by all the traits that you got to know of them from them. By using this information, their traits and strengths, you guided them to where they needed to go. Thank you for sharing this learning with us today.